Thanks, Scott.
I think we're good. So you're going to send me to the audience, so I'll watch.
Enjoy.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the National Constitution Center, and a very happy Juneteenth to all of you. We are celebrating our nation's second Independence Day online all day. We've got a program every hour, so we're really excited that you're here. Hope to see you again at another one today. And we are also celebrating live at the National Constitution Center. My friend Brian is going to walk us through all of the kind of events leading to Juneteenth, why we celebrate this national holiday. I'm really talking about Juneteenth and the Constitution as well. So we're going to get started in just a couple minutes, but please feel free to pop in the chat where you're tuning in from, who you are tuning in with. We love to see where everyone's coming from. George is the first. Welcome, George, from Brooklyn, New York. Super excited to have you all here today. We've got friends from New York. We've got friends from California, Philadelphia.
Good morning, everybody. How are you, folks? Thank you all for joining us here today at the National Constitution Center. We're pleased to have you folks joining us in person, as well as any friends of ours online viewing as well, as we celebrate Juneteenth here at the National Constitution Center. Now, today, I'll be getting us started with a little bit of a presentation of what exactly are we observing today, or at least what are the constitutional connections? Because after all, we are the National Constitution Center. And I think it's a pretty important story to tell, because how this holiday comes about, the initial events that lead up to it, are really dependent upon a lot of debate and, as we know, conflict about the United States Constitution. By the way, I feel I should introduce myself. My name is Brian, and once again, I want to thank all of you folks for joining us. And I hope we'll have a wonderful day here at the center. But if you folks are ready, I think I'm ready to dive in. Come on, friends, find a seat. Oh, amazing. We ready? How many of us, if I already asked you already, anybody who could already tell me what Juneteenth is? What are we observing? Oh, wow. I'll give it just a moment as we have several more friends joining us. Hi, folks. Welcome. Plenty of good seats still available. Thank you so much for joining us. Give us a moment for our friends who are viewing live streaming as well, an opportunity to get settled and make ourselves comfortable. Wonderful. Thank you, folks. It's great to see so many of you this early in the day, gathering to hopefully learn a little bit about the Constitution. Now, just once again, I'll introduce myself. My name is Brian. I am one of our members of our education team here at the National Constitution Center. We love every opportunity to speak to folks about American history, the Constitution, our form of government, and the way that we, the people of the United States, have really helped to shape that. And honestly, how we've really redefined who is part of that we, the people. Now, as we gather here on Juneteenth, I think I'd asked you folks, but I didn't know if anybody was feeling confident enough to throw out an answer there. What exactly, does anyone know what we are observing? Like, what is this anniversary, or what's the significance of this event? And I know I'm putting you on the spot. You got an answer, sir? Wonderful. This gentleman said when in Galveston, Texas, June 19th, 1865, when they were notified that the Emancipation Proclamation applied, that they were indeed free. And that is very specific, that event that occurred on that day. Now, more broadly speaking, a lot of folks view this as a date or a holiday, essentially to observe the end of slavery in the United States of America. And we say this more broadly because the war is dwindling by that point. Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia surrenders more than 2 months earlier. The Emancipation Proclamation had been issued way before then, but this is really when the furthest reaches of the Confederacy sees that Emancipation Proclamation applied to it, that the last of those areas that were, to quote a famous document, the areas that were in a state of actual rebellion against the authority of the United States when it actually came to apply. Now, the earliest observations, as you can imagine, go back basically as soon as the first anniversary, back to 1866. It becomes a state holiday in Texas. You mentioned Galveston initially in 1980. Congress passes a resolution. So it's like, okay, we're going to recognize this. There's not any federal offices closed, anything of that nature, but this is the first real federal observation in 1997. And then as of 2020, just a few years ago, 47 states and Washington, D.C. have annual celebrations. The last year before we have our map here, there was just a handful of states remaining. And by 2021, the national holiday, the act was passed, and this became an actual federal holiday, joining many of the others, Memorial Day, Independence Day, and the like. Now, the origins, as we said, these can be traced to Galveston, Texas, June 19th, 1865. General Gordon Granger issues his General Order Number 3. And this is really, as we said, fulfilling that promise of the Emancipation Proclamation, which is issued more than 2 years earlier on New Year's Day, 1863. But for the folks who are living in and enslaved in Galveston, Texas, it is not till nearly 2.5 years later that that promise is actually fulfilled. It was at that time the second largest city in Texas and the westernmost part of the Confederacy, and effectively one of the last areas that were still in actual armed rebellion. So this is seen as really the culmination, and why it's often celebrated as fulfilling that promise of that Emancipation Proclamation. But if we're talking here about the Constitution and Juneteenth, I want to go back. Why is all of this debate? Why are these issues, these grand steps to abolish slavery, why are these necessary? And we can go all the way back. Honestly, we can go all the way back to the fellas, our Howard Chandler Christie painting we love to feature here of the signing of the Constitution, September 17th, 1787. So I wanted to ask you folks, the day these fellas sign it, or if you visit us here in person at the Constitution Center, maybe you see all of those statues we have in Signers Hall. The original unamended Constitution, how many times does the word slavery appear? I'm seeing some folks doing this here. 0. It does not appear. But if you know what you're looking for, there are references. Honestly, over the course of nearly 4 months, the delegates who are meeting here in Philadelphia have a number of debates about the structure of government, the powers it ought to have or ought not to have, and more. And eventually, many of the compromises lead to the word slavery not appearing in the Constitution. But if you know what you're looking for, there are several references. And I'll actually show you folks these too. And this will really show that the institution of slavery was protected under the original Constitution. And honestly, that's the argument that many of the southern states make when they break away. The first instance is going to be in probably the most famous. People know this as the 3/5 Compromise. In Article 1, Section 2, Article 1, which talks about our Congress, the House of Representatives and the Senate. Section 2, so one of the first parts of the entire U.S. Constitution is the references that representatives shall be apportioned according to the numbers of people, according to population. And we still do that today, every 10 years in the census. But it says that when we are conducting the census, the number shall be determined, including the whole number of free persons, including those bound to service for a term of years, and excluding Indians not taxed, 3/5 of all other persons. Some dense legal language, right? But let's simplify that there. We're counting all free persons and then 3/5 of all other persons. If you're not a free person, what else would you be, right? We're not saying people who are enslaved, but the language is there if you're looking for it. The next part is Article 1, Section 9. We're still talking about Congress, the abilities of our legislative branch. This section, but they're getting into what powers Congress does or does not have. says the migration or importation of such persons as any of the states now existing shall think proper to admit shall not be prohibited prior to 1808. Well, think about the language here. The migration, or what kind of persons could you say are imported rather than immigrate, right? The language is there. This is saying that until for 20 years after the ratification of the Constitution, until 1808, the federal government cannot ban the Atlantic slave trade. The federal government can control international trade, but this is something that they have to wait until 1808 to touch as a compromise. This is something that has a pretty significant impact. As many people are brought to America enslaved in those 20 years as the more than 60 years prior to that. So this has a huge impact, this 20-year ban. And actually, there's another reference to this in Article 5, the part of the Constitution that talks about the amendment process, where it says you can't amend the Constitution to change this and give Congress the ability to abolish it. It was one of only two things, that and depriving states of equal representation in the Senate are the only two things the Constitution could not be amended to change. And then the third one, and this one ends up becoming really a significant one, is no person held to service or labor in one state escaping into another, well, that language there, shall be, because of the consequence of the law or regulation therein. And this is 1787. Pennsylvania has passed a gradual abolition law that says if you are in Pennsylvania for 6 months or more, you will be free. Massachusetts has passed an abolition law, or has, by act of the state judiciary, taken steps. So we're seeing some steps there. And this is saying that people who escape from one state to another are not released from their service or labor. What kind of job can you not just quit or walk away from, or say, I don't want to do this anymore? So the language is there. And the southern states remember that. Over the next several decades, as there are conflicts, as the country struggles to figure out how to govern itself, how to find itself divided, because eventually, by the early 1800s, all of the original northern states, north of that Mason-Dixon line, north of the Ohio River, have abolished slavery. The debate continues going westward. The Missouri Compromise in 1820 says the southern border of Missouri is that dividing line. And there continues to be a debate about whether to let new territories vote, whether the federal government has this power. Eventually, it boils over in 1860, and South Carolina is the first southern state to declare its secession, that it is independent of the United States. And what do they have to issue for their reasoning? One of them, they say, is a hostility on the part of non-slave holding states to the institution of slavery has led to the disregard of their obligations. These states, a fugitive is discharged from service or labor. I actually cut out a bit. It names several northern states that are doing this. Essentially, South Carolina says Article 4, that fugitive slave clause, many northern states are saying, if you make it here, you're free. And South Carolina is saying, no, you and the Constitution says you have to help return those people to slavery. And it is one of their main reasons they cite for why they would secede from the Union. They go on and mention that a geographical line was drawn across the country. All of the states north united to the election of Lincoln. And his purposes are hostile to slavery. And the South Carolina Declaration of Secession quotes his House Divided speech, that the government cannot endure half slave and half free. And so they're like, well, we don't want to find out which half is going to triumph. We are going to break away from this United States. 7 states have seceded before Abraham Lincoln takes office as president. They do not wait to see what actions he will take. South Carolina is the first. They are not alone. Just one more example, the Mississippi Declaration of Secession. They say, we feel we should have to explain why we're doing this. And this is the first 2 sentences of the Mississippi Declaration of Secession. Our position is thoroughly identified with the institution of slavery, the greatest material interest of the world. And these states act on it. We see the firing on Fort Sumter, the beginning of the actual conflict. And then for the next several years, the United States is at war. After more than a year of fighting, there's pressure on President Lincoln to take some step, because though the southern states from day one are saying they are doing this to preserve slavery, Lincoln is early on mentioning that he's doing this to preserve the Union, to keep the nation together. And many are arguing that he doesn't have that constitutional power to end it. But In September of 1862, September 22nd, 100 days before the new year, he does make an announcement saying that on New Year's Day, on the 1st of January, all persons who are held enslaved in states that are in rebellion against the United States shall be free. And that the US military and the US government will recognize their freedom and make sure that they are forever free. And then Lincoln is giving 100 days. So he's still not doing this right away. He's saying these southern states have 100 days to stop fighting. And if they stop fighting, slavery can persist and can remain. We know that they don't. They continue. They don't trust Lincoln. They don't believe him. Also, maybe they feel they can win. But this war continues. And so on New Year's Day, 1863, he quotes this. And Lincoln is aware of the clauses in the Constitution that would have protected slavery. So the Emancipation Proclamation is also really specific. He says that I, as commander-in-chief, he's quoting what the Constitution refers to him as. He says, I am the commander-in-chief of the military in a time of armed rebellion against the United States. And this is a necessary step to stop the rebellion. If this is the key part of the Southern economy, if these states are saying this is the most important thing we have going for us, then, and if these are treating people as property, this can be seized. They can be, one point calls them contrabands. And so the next part, it actually goes into, we say the following to wit, he's very specific about where this applies. Because again, if this is going to be following at least the Constitution as written, it cannot be abolished everywhere. Northern border states like Delaware, Maryland, Missouri, Kentucky, this is not going to apply there. And in fact, take a look. This is where we see when he signs this on New Year's Day, where will it apply and where won't? New Orleans is exempted. The eastern shore of Virginia is exempted. Norfolk, Tennessee, and all of those border states as well. So it does not apply everywhere all at once. And it doesn't apply in any of those places in dark blue, at least initially, because those are the places that are not under federal control. These ones that are in the light blue there, by this point, the Union Army, the federal government has reasserted its control over them. And because that means they're not in rebellion, they don't feel they have the constitutional authority to end slavery there. And really, you can see, depending where we're talking about, the end of slavery is not in one particular place. Bright colors all over the place. Here we can see state by state when where does slavery end. And some of these ones we can see with the Emancipation Proclamation, the act of it could through all of these southern states that are in orange and gold and pink. And eventually Texas, we see, would be that last area. The last places are actually Kentucky and Delaware, and those would not be till the 13th Amendment in December of 1865. But the immediate effect is going to be people hail this. There's printing in Harper's Weekly of the Emancipation Proclamation hailing this. Frederick Douglass says that New Year's Day will be as significant as the 4th of July in American history because of the Emancipation Proclamation. It's also key because besides spelling out that people who were enslaved in these places are free now, Lincoln actually goes on and says they can serve in the US military. And we raise throughout northern states, this is at Fort William Penn here in Philadelphia, as well as throughout southern states. It says people who are enslaved, men of suitable condition, will be received into the armed service. And tens of thousands of Black men from southern states join the Union Army and become a force to help fight for the freedom of millions of others. Now, over the course of the next 2.5 years, that promise is fulfilled. And we see on June 19th, 1865, General Gordon Granger follows through with that. And in Galveston, Texas, he would issue this and essentially is informing the local population, how he drafts this, that the people of Texas are informed that in accordance with the proclamation of the executive, all slaves are free and involves an absolute equality of personal rights and the rights of property between former masters and slaves. The connection is now between employer and hired labor. This language is actually really bold, the absolute equality. General Granger is actually going a bit beyond the terms of the Emancipation Proclamation. This is language that we really see in the 14th Amendment, that all persons born or naturalized are citizens of the United States and are guaranteed equal protection of the laws. But he's not alone there. By the time he issues this in June 1865, in some southern states, an address of the colored citizens of Richmond, Virginia, they actually do draft a statement addressing the public and saying fellow citizens, proclaiming themselves to be citizens already. So this vision is there. And we see this language here in a mural that was actually unveiled in Galveston near the site. The building no longer stands where General Granger would have issued this, called Absolute Equality by Reginald Adams here. Some really interesting and compelling images going from the signing of that General Order number 3 all the way through. We see marches for equality that would follow in the years to come. Now, what happens next? Of course, it becomes a established holiday in late, but it varies the date, state, place by place. That June 19th is a Texas-based, and we'll see some others. It becomes, of course, it continues to, but we see the final abolition with the 13th Amendment in December of 1865. The language of it is pretty simple. There are multiple drafts. You've ever take a look at our Civil War and Reconstruction exhibit or our online resources. We have a number of drafts, but ultimately the language of it, slavery nor involuntary servitude except as punishment for a crime, it shall not exist in the United States. And Congress has the power to enforce this. And following emancipation, celebrations take place around the country in the years to come. We've seen of Washington, D.C. This one is April 19th. 1866, because April 19th is the anniversary of the D.C. Emancipation Act, which had taken place in 1862. Texas, there are Juneteenth celebrations. It's a well-established holiday by this point in 1900. In Richmond, Virginia, there are Emancipation Day parades. This one would have taken place on April 3rd, however, and really drives home the change from the eastern parts of the Confederacy to the west. April 3rd, 1865 would have been when the Emancipation Proclamation takes effect in Richmond, and it's 2.5 months later before it takes effect in Galveston, Texas. Now, we know that they're having these resolutions proposing this to be a federal observation. The holiday comes about, and the Juneteenth National Independence Day Act is introduced in February of 2021. It's approved by the Senate in June, and just before the holiday in 2021, literally just before, on June 17th, it is signed into law, becoming the newest federal holiday in the United States, and marked with observations and celebrations around the country, including here in Philadelphia. And I thank you folks for joining us here in Philadelphia to observe this and learn a little bit about the constitutional history, the background and events, and what was in place before that leads up to this holiday and these events. And I really encourage you to join us for any of our other programs here today, including we have Scholar Talk in this space, other presentations and programs, a chat with some historical abolitionists and figures as well. But I want to thank you folks so much for joining us. Have a wonderful day. Happy Juneteenth, everybody. Thank you.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in for this presentation. A huge thank you to my coworker, Brian, who is able to kind of walk us through the history of Juneteenth and kind of the importance of this holiday. And we are so excited that you were able to celebrate our nation's second Independence Day with us. As Brian mentioned, we have so many programs happening today. The next one, feel free to check your email. You should have an email from me, Madison, letting you know a little bit about our Scholar Talk that's happening at 11:45 a.m. Eastern. Dr. Emily Blank of Rowan University is actually writing a book on Juneteenth, and we're super excited because we asked her, we begged, we said, please, please, please come talk about your research today at the National Constitution Center. So she will be live in the auditorium answering questions, talking about her research, the history of Juneteenth, and kind of diving in deeper, even deeper into the subject. So we hope you tune in. It's going to be a wonderful program, and we also have a number of programs happening throughout the day. If you have any interest with bringing your students, if any of your students are still in school, we do have a town hall at 12:45 Eastern where we're going to have two freedom fighters, Henry Box Brown and Bishop Richard Allen, are going to be on stage live with us. They've traveled through time to be with us today to talk a little bit about what Juneteenth means to them and their own incredible stories about the fight for abolition. In Henry Box Brown's case, the fight to literally ship himself to freedom. It's a remarkable story, and we hope that you are able to join us then. But for now, I'm going to bid you all adieu until the next program starts in a little under 40 minutes. And we hope to see you again soon. If you're in the Philadelphia area, head on over to the National Constitution Center. We have free admission today, courtesy of citizens. So check it all out, see those exhibits, see those artifacts, and we hope to see you soon, either in person or online.